One of the biggest and longest running debates in all of Warhammer 40,000 is the Chaos Defiler cool or not? This is a war that's been raging since 2008 when the model came out. A lot of people are on the camp of absolutely 100% the Chaos Defiler is the greatest model Games Workshop has ever made, and other people, probably most people, are on the camp of no, the Defiler is not cool, it was never cool, and boy, does it look old these days. The lore states that no one truly knows how they came into existence, but there are tantalizing clues and forgotten fragments of ancient texts that point to how such an affront came into being. Defilers are mechanical bodies that Chaos Space Marines shove demons into, much to the demons' displeasure. And artwork of the Defilers go really hard. They look like murder. It's one of Games Workshop's weirdest creations. I remember back in high school cracking open the codex and thinking, alright, we got some Terminators, those guys are pretty cool. We got Chaos Space Marines, those guys are nice and spiky. Ooh, those guys are neat. We got a Rhino back there, and what is that? The Defiler is something truly unique to Chaos, with no loyalist counterpart. It made it really unique, and the model is certainly unique. The Defiler is definitely one of those kits that needs a lot of mental Photoshop and nostalgia goggles to really appreciate it. One of the reasons I never collected Chaos much is because Chaos Space Marines are mostly just Space Marines and I already collect Space Marines. But I would always get a little wistful about the kits that don't have a loyalist counterpart, chief among them, the Defiler. Now that I have a Death Guard army, I have a very good excuse to add a Defiler to my list, but I don't really want to add the Games Workshop one. And so, what am I to do but make my own? Presenting the Desecrated Engine. The Defiler is a great idea, a tangled mess of mechanical limbs and weapons, and we here at EonsOfBattle have been hard at work crafting our own take on the mechanical beast. Artist Liqerise, sculptor Radium Minis, Commander-in-Chief Nick, and me have all worked to bring this vision to life. The Desecrated Engine has everything a growing warband needs, like titanic weapons, crushing claws ready to tear apart vehicles and infantry alike, and an entire armory of weapons including the belly gun, complete with teeth and eyeballs and feeding from an external magazine. The armor is all separate to make painting easier and to make it simpler in the future to make some alternatives. The legs have been swapped from bucket loaders to more elegant and chaotic limbs. Being a bit more attractive goes a long way to appeasing the captive demon. The Desecrated Engine is available on our website now as of the month of November. Anybody subscribed to our terrain tier or higher can pick them up using a credit. Vehicles are a little harder to paint than infantry, and this guy is a bit of both, so I want to do some sub-assemblies, painting his legs and weapons separate from the body. For my Death Guard scheme, I glued all the armor on to make it easier to do my incredibly tricky scheme, and for the smaller stuff like the head, I stuck it onto some paint handles. Now to get a feel for this mini, I gave him a Zenithal Prime blasting white from above, letting me quickly see the raised areas and leaving me with dark recesses. I paint my Death Guard in a psychedelic style that I discovered by using a limited palette and just messing around, and so far I've painted about one of each Death Guard unit, but this will be my biggest challenge yet. Another thing that makes my Death Guard unique is I use paints from a starter set from an out-of-business paint line. Not because these colors are better than other paints, but because it's what I used on the first one and I'm just keeping it going until I run out. These colors are pink, transparent teal, rusty red, mustard yellow, gray that need a little bit more shaken, transparent indigo, and white. To do my scheme, there's no perfect step one. I have to lay down color and discover the paint job in the process. I loaded up my brush with color and slobbered this over the model randomly. You could call this style chaotic. Working fast kept my paint patches wet, letting me blend in between the colors. I didn't worry too much about cleaning off my brush before moving on to new colors and going back to old ones. Now that I have some color everywhere, I can start to add in some value. And the way I do this is mixing some white into my paint to lighten them and then laying them down on the model. It's very abstract, but it is purposeful. It's like painting pretending I'm painting in only black and white, or using colorblind glasses. I'm not worrying about color at all. It's all about value, sketching on lighter and lighter highlights, focusing on the shapes and where I'm putting my paint. Sketching, blending, and edge highlighting until I've made this particular section of tank look good, regardless of what color it ends up being. Once I made it to pure white, I went back to my original colors, mixing in browns and blues to darken them and reinforcing the shadows, covering up all the parts that were still primer black, and glazing this over my colors to tint them. It's weird doing this on such a big model. Most Death Guards are little fellows with small details, but on a big chonkin' Defiler, it takes a lot more paint and a lot more strokes to achieve a similar look. The first pass hit the trim, and now I'm moving on to the pecs, and here I want to focus on color. The boobs ended up being very orange, so I want to reinforce this with a more saturated orange color, and to focus on texture, I painted it in a stippling pattern. Making smaller and smaller dots, mixing yellow into my paint until some of the dots were bright, and then I used green to make it look like some slimy stuff was dribbling down from somewhere in the machine. I really like how the chest is turning out, so it's time to roll on to another detail, the belly gun. I glazed pink over the gun because why not, and then used thinned down brown as a wash over the teeth and mouth of the gun. Then I started highlighting the teeth, painting on stripes of brighter and brighter brown until I was painting just a little bit of white. Is this mouth eating the gun or vomiting the gun? We may never know. With the teeth done, I cleaned up the pink barrel and got to highlighting, sketching a yellow-white reflection on the top of the gun. After some more blending and glazing, I decided the gun needed some veins, so I took my best paintbrush and thinned down some round paint and got to work scribbling, starting at the teeth and then dragging it over the shaft. I love how the gun looks. The last little thing is a green glaze to make the flesh of the cannon look more sickly. Moving up from the cannon, the next detail is the eyes. I think some silly eyes would be the perfect touch. I base coated them in white, glazed on some blue for shadows, and then sketched in a dark blue pupil, given some reflective spots of white, and of course, these eyes need some veins too. I used some brown from the veins to create some tear streaks coming off of the eyes. It's tragic, those eyes can't blink. They're just forever looking for targets for the cannon to shoot at. The next part I decided to tackle was the shoulder pads. These big shoulders would be perfect for decals, but no such decals exist in my colors, so I have to make it up for myself. After some highlights of yellow, I decided the Mark and Nurgle would be just the thing, freehanding 3 balls and some sketchy highlights exploding out from the sides, and I kept adding to my balls with more and more layers of yellow mixed in with whites, blues, and greens to make the balls stand out. I was noticing just how perfectly smooth the mini printed, and that is all thanks to being printed in Tech Resin, the best quality 3D printing resin. And if you follow the link, you can use the code EonsOfBattle to get 8% off your order of fast navy gray. Now that I have a decent chunk of the mini rendered, I decided to use some white dry brushing to brighten up some spots and help me visualize what I should do on the rest of the mini. On these pipes, I'm thinking intestines. Some folks keep their intestines on the inside, but this demon engine has them on the outside. After a pink base coat, I went back and forth with all the colors in my palette, darkening them, brightening them, and then dry brushing and layering before dirtying them up again. He might be 10 times the size of a Death Guard Legionnaire, but he's got the same complexion. And one last thing I almost forgot, his cannon shells. There are all sorts of fun shapes in this piece, and all it needs is some glazing. Orange and yellow on the shells, and then a dry brushing of white to get it ready for a green and blue. These colors happen to be transparent in the paint set I got all those years ago, and I can leverage this, treating them like speed paints and contrast paints, tinting the values underneath. After a dousing of rusty red wash, the cannon was ready to be reloaded. I'm building my Defiler as a Death Guard Defiler, which is identical to the regular Chaos Space Marine Defiler, although it does grant Nurgle's Gift, which is an aura effect that makes my opponent's army quite a bit worse, and it grows over the course of the game, although Defiler is really big, so even on turn 1 when it's only a 3-inch bubble, it's a pretty big bubble. The other thing that makes Defiler special, other than just being a Defiler and one of the most recognizable things in 40k, is the special ability Scuttling Walker. Defilers can freely move over friendly monsters and vehicles. Kind of a whatever rule. I feel like if I move block my own tank, I'm not playing the game very well. I think Games Workshop missed out on an amazing opportunity to make a really fun rule. Also, I would change the name. I would change it from Scuttling Walker to If He Fits, He Sits. Defilers can freely move over enemy monsters and vehicles. I don't even know if that would be amazing, but just the idea of a Defiler scuttling over Angron or some other big bad in my opponent's army, that would be pretty spicy. And speaking of Scuttly Walker, I need to paint the scuttling bits. For the body, I painted up in my classic Death Guard sketchy style, but he has a lot of legs, so I want to see how much I can replicate the painting style, leveraging some easier and faster techniques. I started off by picking the poses of the legs I want. There are many different ones, some more outstretched and some more curled in, so I picked the ones I want and where I want them to go, and then wrote right and left so I can remember after the painting. Then I threw my colors into my airbrush and got to work, starting off with the righties, giving them some cold blue-greens, and on the lefties some warm yellows, blasting all the underparts with orangey brown. This paint set actually did come with a black wash. I don't use it too much, but I decided to throw it over all the mechanical bits. Now all my legs have the start of color. I need to figure out how to get them to look more like my finished Death Guard sketchy blends. I started off with some glazing of dark colors, using a clean paintbrush to wipe it off the high points. Then I sponged on a saturated color, mimicking my sketchy layering using a ratty old paintbrush to dab on lighter and lighter colors. This worked, but I let it get a little bit too bright, so I had to do some corrective glazing to get it back to a saturated scheme. This worked, but it was a mess of painting and checking to see if everything was progressing how I like it, so I decided for the feet of each claw, these big chainsaw-equipped rams, to switch back to sketching and glazing. Slobbering on greens and yellow glazes over half of the legs, and then refining it back and forth with my highlight colors, progressively working on smaller and smaller sections. First the whole foot, then just the tops and bottoms, then just the edges, then just the trim, and then just sections of the trim. Painting my Death Guard is very abstract, and I feel like I learn a lot each time I do it. Unlike typical painting where each color has its place, it's more of a battle. Oops, more orange pooled here than I planned, so this little bit just gets to be more orange. It's a million little mistakes that just add up to every spot getting touched. On the chainsaws, I feel like these weapons were deserving of a little bit more attention, so I used browns to make it look like rust has been dribbling down the sides of the armor. Now for the close combat weapons. Usually for tanks, this is a silly little 3 or 4 punches that hit on 4s or 5s, but for the Defiler, it's the most powerful weapon on the tank. And on my Defiler, these weapons have faces. I started out with a value sketch using white paint to figure out where my highlights should go, and then I ended up glazing over the white paint with more yellow. After that, I used orange to shade the shadows and blues and greens for the recesses. This gave me a decent head, and I can now perfect it with some more precise highlights, mixing in white paints and sketching around the eyes, mohawk, and Darth Vader grill face. On the jaws of the pincer's claws, I went with some cold tones, mostly blue with some light blue scratches and non-metallic metal highlights. I picked out the eyes with a sinister black and his hand faces were done. Now I finally get to put him together. Because he stands on his legs, I need to get his body up in the air for gluing. I found that Eons of Battle dice were the perfect height to get him standing, so I can glue on all his legs using a lot of super glue. He stands, my crabby boy stands, but he's naked right now because he doesn't have his guns. And for once in 10th edition, picking the weapon options is actually kinda tricky because all of the Defiler's guns are good. I've been racking my brain trying to decide exactly what role I need my Defiler to play in game, and I think I've landed on the twin-linked las instead of the autocannons because twin-linked, it actually has a pretty good chance of hitting vehicles pretty hard, and the Defiler's belly gun is actually more of an anti-infantry weapon, but it does 3 damage. So I actually would prefer the belly gun to shoot at vehicles if it can, just on the off chance that it does a little bit of extra damage. Now, for the anti-infantry on this guy, it's a toss-up between the Havoc Launcher and the Twin Flamer, but I actually think I gotta give it to the Twin Flamer for the AP and the Twin Linked, so it's re-rolling everything and not rolling to hit. I think that gives me the best chance of wiping out screening units, because I'm bringing a Defiler. My opponent is gonna try to screen me out turn 1, but the Flamer gives me a good chance of getting rid of those screens, which leaves me open to charging with the Defiler's delicious Strength 16 Defiler claws. I think I'm gonna be gluing, I probably poster tacking these weapons on for my first few games just to make absolutely sure, but I'm pretty excited. For the Flamer, I want this thing looking gross. I don't know if it's fire that's coming out of the front of this bad boy, but whatever it is, you don't want it getting on you. I glazed on some yellows and greens, doing a lot of washes to tint it darker and darker. Another reason I want it dark is to do a bit of lighting. I want the nozzle and heat shroud to be flowing with green energy, and the best way to have that energy shine through is for it to be much brighter than the surrounding gun. I dripped white paint into my holes and then tinted them with a mix of my blue and green transparent paints, giving it a ghostly look that tucked right under the shoulder pad. Now for the more refined and accurate twin las cannon. I put on my colors, treating this a lot more like a standard paint job, where every part gets its color. Blue for the armor, rusty brown for the trim, green black for its mechanical bits, and gray for the las barrels. Highlighting everything up to a pure saturated color, and then edge highlights of almost pure white. Now with the weapons attached, there is just one thing left, his mug. I've got 2 options, the Spooky Knight or the Grill Face. I went with the Grill Face. And I can use his chest to help inform the paint job, half green, half yellow. I slobbered on my base coats, putting the paint on thin so my zenithal shows through, giving me a map of where to put my highlights and shadows, and got to work layering. I worked up to the brightest versions of my colors and used rusty brown to do some pin shading around the edges. I made his horns extra horny, and for his eyes, some horizontal stripes of white. 1 drop of glue later and my battle tank is ready for action. My little demon engine is all Dunyan rings, and he is ready to join the disgusting cohort that is my Death Guard army. With him, I am now up to about 1,000 points, and I've been thinking really hard about what I want the other 1,000 points to look at. I've played Death Guard once in TTS, and I had a very good time, but I played a very normal Death Guard list, and I discovered that they are incredibly slow. I like all of my 40k armies to have a very unique playstyle. My Space Marines are all about close combat, my Drukhari are shenanigans the army, and my Tyranids are all about the brain bugs. And so for Death Guard, I'm thinking I want fast Death Guard. The Defiler is gonna be my first step in making my fast Death Guard, but I also have Deep Strike and Terminators, and I got some War Dog Brigands. Not only am I going fast, but I'm going a lot of walkers. And speaking of walkers, this little walker is gonna be available on our website, EonsOfBattle.com, as of the month of November. I've done mine up in my Death Guard colors, although our artist Liqerise has done one in a very Emperor's Children vibe. Also, my Defiler needs a name. I don't even have any good ideas. Maybe Cactus, because he's so pointy? I don't know, let me know in the comments below what I should name my Defiler. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching.